3,
Caroline,
2,
laughter.
1. Okay. Yeah. We're in Ezekiel today, so if you want to flip to Ezekiel. Have you guys ever seen a horror movie? Yes, have you seen a horror movie? Or like a scary movie? Well, I hadn't really ever read through Ezekiel before, and it kind of is like a horror movie. It's full of weird, inexplainable stuff that it kind of scared me a little bit. And this is kind of the book where, in a lot of the others, the prophets warn about, if you don't repent, God's going to judge, and the countries come and conquer the Israelites. But in Ezekiel, God really pours out His judgment. It's a tough book. There's stuff. God talks about Israel being like an abandoned baby kicking in its own blood. He compares His people to a wife who turns from her husband to be defiled and become a prostitute. And the language in this book, it's offensive, it's gruesome, and yet it's God speaking and it's God's word. So we're going to talk about kind of what to do with it, and yeah. So when I start out, who likes to draw? Do you guys like to draw? Do you really?
Yeah.
Okay. Madison, do you like to draw? Ella, Kate?
Yeah.
I'm going to need your help on this first chapter because there's something weird here. We've had this here. Grab a marker. Yeah. I need to figure these out. Okay. Can someone read Ezekiel 1, 4 through 28? And Tyler, can you read that for me? And as Tyler's reading, I want you to draw what is being described here, if you can. It's going to be pretty weird, but can you start reading?
As I looked, a stormy wind came out of the north. A great cloud with brightness surrounded it, and fire flashing forth continually, and in the middle of the fire, something like bleeding amber. In the middle of it was something like 4 living creatures. This was their appearance. They were of human form. Each had 4 faces, and each of them had 4 wings. Their legs were straight, and the soles of their feet were like the sole of a calf's foot, and they sparkled like burnished bronze.
Okay, I'm going to stop you there. So what do we have so far? What has been described? There's 4 things, 4 creatures, and they have 4 faces.
4 wings.
4 wings. Their feet are like calves' feet, so they've got hooves that are made of bronze. Okay, keep going from where you stopped.
Under their wings, on their 4 sides, they had human hands, and the 4 had their faces and their wings thus. Their wings touched one another. Each of them moved straight ahead without turning as they moved. As for the appearance of their faces, the 4 had the face of a human being. The face of a lion on the right side, the face of an ox on the left side, and the face of an eagle. Such were their faces. Their wings were spread out above. Each creature had 2 wings, each of which touched the wing of another, while 2 covered their bodies. Each moved straight ahead. Wherever the Spirit would go, they went without turning as they went. In the middle of the living creature, there was something that looked like burning coals of fire, like torches moving to and fro among the living trees.
Okay, I'm going to stop you there. Okay, so Ezekiel, this is kind of like the Ezekiel's call narrative, kind of like we saw with Jeremiah. God shows up, gives him a vision. And in this vision, Ezekiel sees these beings with 4 different faces. So one's a human face, there's an eagle, a lion, and an ox. And they've got 4 wings. And I don't know, that's just, and later they're identified as angels or cherubim. And also they're like standing on these wheels, like 2 intersecting wheels that could go either way. And Ezekiel here, he talks about them going wherever the Spirit leads without turning. And so it's like this, it's this big complicated image that, I don't know, it sounds like something out of a sci-fi movie to me. like if I was thinking of Alien or something weird, you probably haven't seen that. Never mind. And so this idea that what God's trying, or what God is communicating here is that He's highly mobile, that He can go anywhere. And later on it talks about how God's sitting on this throne that's above these four creatures. And whenever they move, the Spirit moves, and so they go without changing direction. And it's just this communicating this idea that, you know, God can be anywhere, and that also He's not limited to Jerusalem's temple. And that'll come up later in Ezekiel. And so God asks him to talk about certain things. And instead of just telling the Israelites things, like some of the other prophets, Ezekiel's kind of unique in that God asks him to do special things. So can someone read, turn to chapter 4. And T, can you read 4 to 12 for me?
Now lie on your left side and place the sins of Israel on yourself. You are to bear their sins for the number of days you lie there on your sides. I am requiring you to bear Israel's sin for 390 days, 1 day for each year of their sin. After that, turn over and lie on your right side for 40 days, 1 year for each of Judah's sin. Meanwhile, keep staring at the siege of Jerusalem. Lie there with your arm bared and prophesy her destruction. I will tie you up with ropes so you won't be able to turn from side to side until the days of your siege have been completed. Now go and get some wheat, barley, beans, lentils, millet, and emmer wheat, and mix them together in a storage jar. Use them to make bread for yourself during 390 days you will be lying on your side. Ration this out to yourself, 8 ounces of food for each day, and eat it at set times. Then measure out a jar of water for each day and drink it at set times. Prepare and eat this food as you would barley cakes. While all the people are watching, bake it over a fire using dried human dung.
Using what?
Dried human dung as fuel, and eat the bread.
Okay, so God asks Ezekiel to, make this big thing of clay, draw on it, put like siege machines up against it. Do you guys know what those are? They're like big towers that armies would push up against another city's wall, so they could either climb into it or shoot arrows into it. Later on, they'd have big catapults. They would throw things, and I don't think they had those here, but they were just things to prevent people from leaving the city or going into the city. Big siege instruments, they're called. So he has them make those and push them up against the block. And then he has Ezekiel lie on his side for 390 days, representing the siege of Israel. It's like kind of extreme. And then to go even beyond that, he asks him to cook all of his food over human excrement. And I don't know. I read that and I was like, what? And so thankfully, I think, can you read 14 for me?
Then I said, O sovereign Lord, must I be defiled by using human dung? For I have never been defiled before. From the time I was a child until now, I have never eaten any animal that died of sickness or was killed by other animals. I have never eaten any meat forbidden by the law.
Great. And so Ezekiel obviously kind of freaked out by this. It's like, whoa, God, hey, what are you doing? I've never eaten any of your things. Why should I do this now? And so God, 15, he goes, very well. I'll let you bake your own bread over cow dung instead of human excrement. So, small concession, but whatever. And so the point of this is Ezekiel's not just saying, hey, Israel, you're going to be set in siege and this is going to happen. He actually acts it out so people can see it. It's like an object lesson. So when your teachers give you an object to focus on, we have something in here where there's something concrete you can lay your hands on. It's a lesson like that. Then in the next one, let's see. Can you read, James, can you read 5, 1 through 5?
Sure.
Just 1 through 4, actually.
1 through 4.
Yeah.
Now, son of man, take a sharp sword and use it as a barber's razor to shave your head and your beard. Then take a set of scales and divide up the hair. When the days of your siege come to an end, burn a third of the hair inside the city. Take a third and strike it with the sword all around the city, and scatter a third to the wind. For I will pursue them with drawn sword. But take a few hairs and tuck them away in the folds of your garment. Again, take a few of these and throw them into the fire and burn them up. The fire will spread from there to the whole house of Israel.
So now God has Ezekiel shave his whole head, weigh the different hairs, the amount of hair in like thirds, and then he has them on one hand. He has them burn them in the city, in the middle of the city that he's built. He has another. He throws it around the city, like runs around and hits it with swords. And then another one, he kind of throws it. He throws it back in the fire and burns it up. And can you just picture like the prophet, lying outside of this thing that he built, and then he's throwing hair all around, and hitting it with swords, and burning it, like just weird stuff. And yet God is speaking to His people, and I don't know. We'll talk about it. And can someone read 4:8 through 12? And before you read this. All of this that Ezekiel's doing is kind of a picture of what's coming for Israel if they don't turn. And so God shows, God gives Ezekiel these things to do in front of Israel. And then here's his therefore. This is what's going to happen. So someone read 8 to 12. Carolyn, can you do that for me?
Therefore, as sure as I am the living God, decree of God the Master, because you polluted my sanctuary with the obscenences and disgusting no God idols. I am pouring out, not an ounce of pity I will show you. A third of our people will die either from disease or hunger inside the city. A third will be killed outside the city, and a third will be thrown into the winds and chased by killers.
My translation says in verse 10, therefore in your midst, or I'm in chapter 5, I'm sorry. Can you read 5:8 through 12?
Yeah. Therefore, wait, is that what I'm reading?
She read.
You read 5? Okay.
Yeah.
Sorry. Well, my translation says, therefore in your midst, parents will eat their children, and children will eat their parents. How does that make you feel when you hear that? God telling us, what's that like? What do you think?
Sorry.
Is that recorded? Jason, I can't believe you said that. It was good. Bad, but it's good. Those feels. How does it make you feel that God is saying this? Caroline, I'm asking you.
Kind of sad and kind of weirded out.
Why does it make you sad?
Because I feel like in this instance it feels like God doesn't lie to us and He tells us that He does.
And so does it maybe like He's going back on His promises?
Mm-hmm.
Yeah. Felt like that to me too. And so from chapter 4 to kind of the end of chapter 7, just kind of object lessons, and then chapter 7, God gives Ezekiel kind of this big long speech to say. And so we're going to go into chapter 8, and this kind of talks about exactly what the Israelites were doing that merits this kind of judgment. So I'm just going to read. I'm going to read chapter 8, so we can kind of get through it. So God takes Ezekiel, he lifts him up, and he takes him throughout Israel. And kind of shows him different things. So this is God talking to Ezekiel. Son of man, do you see what they are doing? The utterly detestable things the house of Israel is doing here. Things that will drive me far from my sanctuary, but you will see things that are even more detestable. So he brought me to the entrance of the court, and he said to me, go in and see the wicked and detestable things. So I went in and I saw all over the walls all kinds of crawling things and unclean animals and idols of the house of Israel. In front of them stood 70 elders of the house of Israel. Each had a censer in his hand, and a fragrant cloud of incense was rising. Son of man, do you see what the elders of the house of Israel are doing in the darkness, each at the shrine of his own idol? So they say, the Lord does not see us. The Lord has forsaken the land. This specific instance, there's another god who, when they had these incense, their followers would worship him by touching their nose to this god. And so they're worshiping another god in the courts of God's house. Not okay. And then he brought me to the entrance of the north gate of the house of the Lord, and I saw women sitting there mourning the god Tammuz. Do you see this, son of man? You will see things that are even more detestable than this. And I looked Tammuz up on Wikipedia, and it said that their Tammuz followers, to worship Tammuz, they would weep. They would mourn this god instead of, we think of like praising our god or worshiping or playing music. They would go to Tammuz and they would like cry. I don't know. That's weird. And so here's the Israelites with a God that's provided for them, with a God that deserves worship, and instead they're following a God that in order to worship they have to mourn him. I don't know. And then finally, and this is kind of the worst offense. He then brought me to the inner court of the house, and there at the entrance of the temple, between the portico and the altar, were about 25 men, with their backs toward the temple of the Lord and their faces toward the east. They were bowing down to the sun in the east. This is interesting in that there's 25 men here in the inner court of the house of the Lord. And so at this time there were 24 priests in the temple, and the 25th would have been the high priest of all of Israel. And so they're in the inner court, not the holiest of holies, but before that. And they have their back turned towards the holiest of holies, and they're bowing down for the east. In that time, to turn your back on someone symbolically was a really deep insult. And so not only are they worshiping the sun in the house of God, they're turning their back to God, just in kind of like, we reject you. And not only do we just reject you, we're going to insult you and do this. And so finally, in chapter 9, God says, again, this is what I'm going to do. Can someone read, it's pretty short, chapter 9 for me? Madison, can you read chapter 9? It's only 11 verses.
Then he cried in my ears with a loud voice, saying, bring near the executioners of the city, each with his destroying weapon in his hand. And behold, 6 men came from the direction of the upper gate, which faces north, each with his weapon for slaughter in his hand. And with them a man clothed in linen, with a writing case at his waist, and they went in and stood beside the bronze altars. Now the glory of the God of Israel had gone up from the cherubim on which it rested to the threshold of the house, and he called to a man clothed in linen who had been writing case on his waist. And the Lord said to him, pass through the city through Jerusalem, and put a mark on the foreheads of the men who sigh and groan over abominations that are committed in it. And to the other he said in my hearing, pass through the city after him and strike. Your eyes shall not spare, and you shall show no pity. Kill old men outright, young men and maidens, like little children and women, but touch no one whom is the mark, and begin at my sanctuary. So they began with the elders who were before the house.
That's good. What does God have these people do? Someone summarize that for me?
Kill everybody that does not sigh and groan over all the abominations that are committed.
Mm-hmm. And does he spare anyone?
No one, unless they have a mark.
What are the, so he doesn't spare, women or children? That's hard to read. And kind of going back to what Caroline said, it kind of makes it seem like God promised the Israelites that He would love them, that He would be with them. He